Let's go through your top five, starting with number 5, and I'm sure Jimmy will probably, at the end of it, want to weigh in with a couple of his own. What's number 5, Greg?
I had Darcy Lawler down. Darcy Lawler was the most famous of all referees back in 1963, and West, the Magpies and the Dragons had a lot of competition back there, and there was an incident towards the end of the game where Johnny King went down the sideline. This is the game in all the mud where that famous photo was taken.
Yeah.
And Johnny King was tackled to the ground. Everybody on the ground thought they heard Darcy Lawler call held, but Johnny King got up and dived over in the corner, and that was the winning try.
All right, what about number 4?
I'll go back to 1996. David Manson, Manly versus St George. Manly led 8-2, just conceded a penalty goal.
Yeah.
And Matthew Ridge came to kick off from halfway, kicked the ball 10 metres forward, dived on it. Nathan Brown dived on top of him. And again, everybody expected to play the ball, but not Ridgie. He got up and ran another 30 metres. And Beaver Menzies scored under the post just after that. Kicked Manly away to a lead that was never really challenged after that.
That was a huge play because Manly got a lot of momentum off the back of that. They went into half-time with a spring in their step. I spoke to Mark Carroll for his book, and he told me all about that. He reckoned Ridgie wasn't tackled, the Brown had slid off, but I think a lot of people watching that game, especially St George fans, would differ with that opinion. They reckon Brown made the tackle.
I spoke to David Manson afterwards. He's emphatic that he wasn't tackled, but he then said later on, he said he probably wished he'd made a different decision because of all of the pressure that came on top of him after the game and all that feeling. So, look, it was a touch-and-go decision.
Okay, number 3.
Well, you sitting down, Garry?
Yeah, I'm sitting down, knock me over.
Bruce Maguire in possession of the ball. Tight second half, scores are close. Yeah. Bruce Maguire gets up, plays the ball forward, which you're allowed to do in those days. Steve Walters comes from an offside position.
Correct.
Bruce Maguire grabs him and forces him ahead, and up goes the whistle. Penalty against Bruce Maguire.
I don't think Bruce grabbed him. I think the other guy ran in front of him. He came from the side and put himself in front of Bruce, and Bruce used him. He sort of pushed him, but the first offence, I look at first offence, Greg, and first offence was Walters was offside. He wasn't marker. He got involved in the ruck. He should have been penalised for that.
Yeah, look, I think sometimes referees may blow the whistle and put their arm up the wrong way. That's just my observation. It may have happened that day. Of course, the referee tells a different story. He says he deliberately played a player that was out of play and all that sort of stuff. But I think anybody that watched that would have great, I suppose, misgivings to the fact that a player in possession of the ball got penalised for something where there was a player offside.
But the thing is, Greg, there hasn't been a penalty similar to it in the last 113 years.
No, there was never one before it, and hasn't been one since. You're quite right.
Exactly. That's my point.
Yeah,
that's my point.
Referee Bill Harrigan was the youngest referee to ever do a grand final at that point.
Yeah.
And that was his first grand final,
Yeah. I do think, and there was some feedback from Wayne Pearce. We had a reunion a few years ago, and the game was there, and we went through the game. I've never sort of sat the game till then, go through it. He reckons that Harrigan put the wrong arm up. Similar to what you said, he meant to give Balmain a penalty, but he gave Canberra a penalty, and he wouldn't change his mind.
Yeah, well, you can't change your mind, unfortunately. And,
you can't change your mind, yeah.
Which we'll talk about a little bit later on as we get towards the
that's an hour, because that Canberra went and scored off the next set of 6. That's to try the Gary Belcher scored to get them back in the game from 14-2 to 14-8. So that was a crucial error.
Yeah, and they're the things in big games, that the momentum changes that go. A tight score at the time, and that gave the opposition the opportunity.
Yeah, momentum.
So that was my number 3.
On the back of a 6-1 penalty count against us as well.
No. Greg, what did you bring that up for? Here we go. Okay, let's move along to number 2. Refereeing big club.
I got number 2 here because it doesn't happen very often in games. It's the 1999 grand final, the first one at Stadium Australia, 77th minute.
Yep.
And Melbourne Storm are down 4 points in the grand final. Up goes the kick. Jamie Ainscough collects Melbourne Storm winner Craig Smith high, and the incident the ball goes loose into the in goal, and the incident for the first time ever in a grand final is handed on to the video referee. And video referee Chris Ward, watching replay after replay after replay. And you know, the more with video refereeing, the more you watch it, the more you convince yourself. And that day, Chris Ward was convinced that it was a penalty try, and Bill Harrigan had no choice but to award the penalty try. And that put, with the conversion, Melbourne Storm in front. And in their second year in the competition, Melbourne Storm goes on to win their first premiership.
So Greg, do you think that call wasn't the right one?
No, look, I think overall it was, but I think these days, and it happened during the semi-final series too. On one weekend, we had 2 penalty tries awarded, where the more you watch it, the more video you watch and they slow it down. I think what it's doing is convincing you that the infringement's taken place. You know, we've seen other players tackle in the in goal before, but the fact that it probably caught him a little bit high and the player was knocked out because of it convinced the video referee that it was a penalty try.
It was just such a, Jimmy, it's a massive moment in grand finals, that one. That I was at the game and you could just feel the buzz. What's he going to do? What's he going to do? And I think Harrigan has said that he actually believed it was a penalty try as well before going to Chris Ward. But so, Greg, so if you were referee that day, would you have just given a penalty to Melbourne? What would you have done?
Yeah, look, I think so. I think I probably would have given a penalty, because if it happened 5 metres in the field of play, it would be a penalty. These days, it's complicated by sin bins, whether you sin bin a player or don't sin bin a player or whatever. But it just came out of the blue, and I suppose that's one thing you got to be, as a referee, really on guard, that you know, you just don't expect that thing to happen where a player's taken out, knocked out in the in goal area. Back in my era, before video referees, the most likely outcome would not have been a penalty try.
Yeah. All right, well, it's time for number one. I've got an inkling I know what number one's going to be. It's maybe recent, but I'll leave it to you to unveil.
Yeah, 2 years ago, 2019, the last season of the 2 referees. And probably one of the reasons that they were happy to go to 1 referee may have been as a complication that came out of this. Ben Cummings ruling 6 more tackles and then reversing that decision on the field during the action in the Canberra and Roosters grand final. The scores were tight at the time, of course, and Jack Whiten received the ball. What he then believed and did happen was a call of 6 more tackles by the referee, which was then changed during that play the ball period, or just prior to the play the ball. Whether Jack Whiten should have heard the correction or whatever, to me doesn't matter, because the rule book, as I understand it, and all referees would understand it, is the referee can't change his decision unless it was for prior foul play or on the advice of a touch judge. So in terms of it being out of play or foul play. So the decision to restart the tackle count, in my view, was incorrect. And it's a shame, because Ben Cummins is a terrific guy. He really got thrown under the bus over it.
Can you remember, Greg, as a referee, on the weekend, Toho scored a try for Panthers in the corner, and the goal kicker took the kick about 5 or 6 metres from where the spot was? Has that ever happened to you as a referee?
No, mate, we used to stay in position. That was, Eric Cox used to be our boss. If you'd moved, and that had happened in the game when Eric Cox was in charge, your therapy would be a kick up the backside and 6 months in reserve grade. That's what would happen to you. So you wouldn't make those mistakes. That should never have happened. And
should never have happened.
Mate, can you imagine the outcry there'll be if that happens in the grand final on the weekend? And you just can't get that wrong. You know, the touch judge has got his job, the referee, and sometimes there's a lot of noise going on, and people just lose concentration, and you know, you can't have that sort of stuff happening.
Greg, if that happened in park footy, if that happened under 13s game, the referee get their butt kicked. It's just that's just so elementary.
I don't understand how it's happened, and I think the guys in fact, the 2 involved, the touch judge and the referee, still maintain their role in the grand final.
Yeah, nice.
Todd Smith, Jared Sutton, you know, it was one of those things that you look back in other eras and they may not have, they may not have been there the next week if it had happened.